there were 6 of us on the ballot because there was no incumbent, right? So the 2 top candidates, we went into a runoff. So I had 34% of the vote. The next candidate had 20%. So I had a huge lead. I ended up losing by 44 votes. 44 votes, that's it.
Oh, wait.
It was such a close election, and so I thought, wow, that was rough. It wasn't just rough on me, it was rough on my family. My kids were 5, 3, and my youngest turned 1 during the election. Just having had that sacrifice from my family, I thought I can't put them through that again.
Peace, and welcome. This is Cook on Quarantine. I am Steven Cook, back with another very important, bright, and lovely change agent in our great country. She hails from the city of Houston, which I have a great affinity for. And so I'm looking forward to hearing more about her story. She serves on the Board of Trustees for the Board of Independent School District in Houston. So we are going to talk a bit about why she decided to do a crazy thing like run for office, the issues that Houston is facing around COVID, and we'll get to know her obviously a lot better over the course of our conversation. This is Trustee Judith Cruz. Thank you for coming on Cook on Quarantine. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Steven. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So let me tell you a little bit about why I love Houston.
All right. Okay, I want to hear it. I love Houston too.
It all started with the rapper Mike Jones. I wish
Tell me more.
I wish it was something more cool like Rap-A-Lot Records and Scarface. That'd be a little more like, I get more street cred for that, but it started with Mike Jones. So that was my only impression of it before I actually went a year ago. And I love the vibe there. Did you grow up in Houston?
I grew up in Texas, mostly College Station, which is really close to Houston. That's about an hour and a half from here. I've been in Houston longer than I've lived in any city, so almost 20 years. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely home for sure.
So 20 years in Houston. Okay. What initially brought you to Houston?
So my family moved here while I was in college. And, when I was done with school, I was trying to decide what to do. And I ended up doing Teach for America and going to D.C., Washington, D.C. And I actually lived there for 3 years. Thought I was going to stay longer, loved my experience, but missed my Texas winters and missed my family. And so ended up coming back home to Texas and ended up settling in Houston. I was looking at living in Austin as well, where I had gone to college. But, like you said, the vibe in Houston and the diversity here is unlike, anywhere else. And, I had taught immigrants and I was continuing to teach, and that was the population that I wanted to work with. And so that's why I ended up in Houston.
Yeah, we should get into Teach for America. I beef with Teach for America in San Francisco. We got a lot of issues. So we won't spend too much time. But no beef. You were in DC, which I also love.
I love.
Paint a little picture of your home life growing up in College Station. Like how many siblings? What was the family? What was the home like?
There's 6 of us, 6 kids. I'm the second oldest, 3 boys and 3 girls, okay. Kind of coincidentally. And my mom is from Guatemala. And so we grew up visiting probably like every 2 or 3 years. And we'd always drive. So, we didn't have a lot of money. Having 6 kids, you don't have a lot of extra cash on hand. So we would always drive down to Guatemala, which are some of my best memories growing up. Definitely adventurous. So I grew up in a bilingual home. And, my dad was in school for much of my home life, growing up years. He graduated with his PhD when I graduated high school. So we graduated at the same time. So, I grew up on free and reduced lunch, not a lot of extra things. I got a job at 15 so that I could afford to have, just clothes, that was in style or anything else that I wanted to do that was extra beyond what my parents could afford. And so, but, I have wonderful memories of growing up. My family's very close. Can't complain. I have really, really great memories. And I think it's given me a lens into, the families that are in our school district now. And especially now during the pandemic, what it's like to grow up with not having, everything that you want or desire, but, having to make the most of the opportunities that you're given.
What'd your dad get his PhD in?
Soil science. So he's like a wetland specialist.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So there was
and he actually just retired. And so they moved back to Guatemala. That's where they are now.
Oh, wow.
My parents.
Wow. And you have kids also, right?
Yes. I have 3 sons, 3 children, ages
3 boys.
15, 3 boys, 15, 12, and 10.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's been an adventure during the pandemic, having them home, watching them do their schooling online and the different experiences that they've had. And definitely just having the lens of being a parent in the district, not just during the pandemic, but all the time.
Yeah, I want to get into that. I just wanted to see if you had followed in your parents' footsteps of hella children. It sounds like you about close.
Not 6. Yeah. 3 was good. 3 was good.
With your siblings, what are they up to these days? I see you're on the board of trustees. Like, what's some of the stuff that they're into?
Yeah. So interestingly, my 2 sisters have, followed the path of education and social services. So my oldest sister, she was a teacher for many, many years. And my youngest sister, who was the youngest sibling of the 6 of us, she's a social worker, and she's worked in public schools as a social worker as well, and is actually about to start in a public school setting again as a social worker. So yeah, so it seems like all of us are either, if we're not in education, we're in some sort of social service. And, my parents raised us very mindful of, being aware of the needs of others and not thinking of ourselves, having the lens growing up here, but also going to Guatemala, third world country, seeing poverty in a very different environment. And so always just made us very self-aware and motivated us to work in helping professions.
I want to get into the crazy decision to run for Board of Education. And I want to talk a little bit about like the how to. I've spoken to a number of the folks that we got connected through. We got connected through school board partners, and a number of the school board members around the country I've had on the podcast. People sort of come into their positions in different ways. Some of us are appointed. Some of us have to run for office. You ran, correct?
I ran, and I didn't run just once. This was actually the second time I ran.
Oh, okay.
I lost the first time.
I lost my first time too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You have to share that story with me. Yeah. I mean, after the first time, I was like, no, never. Like, never, ever. No, like, please, no, never again. And somehow, and it was actually 9 years, later that I ran again. So, there were 2 elections in between, and, I just was like, no, it's, I how it is, what a campaign takes, let alone, once you're on the board, but just the campaign alone. Yeah. You have to really think about it.
So I ran and lost in 2014. They ran and won in 2016. Now I had the good sister, Dorian Murray Thomas, on the podcast. And she's so lovely and dynamic.
She is.
She ran at 23 and won. She's so spoiled.
Right? You're like, you had it so easy.
I just called her lovely and dynamic. I just called her spoiled. But the thing that I love about her, because I want to get into your story about, that process for you. The thing I love about her was that is that even though she's so impressive, she just doesn't come off like that at all. She's just like always appreciative, And I would have been super cocky if I won my first race at 23. I needed
and that
to
young, right?
I needed to lose. I needed to get humbled, for real. So you had a 9-year gap. When were you recently elected? What year was it?
So just last year in 2019, November of 2019, I was elected, and then I was sworn in January. Okay. So, I've just been on the board a few months, very new.
It's a good time to start.
I know, right? It's like, I knew it was going to be a challenging task no matter what. But, even when I got sworn in, I don't think we had even heard of COVID. Maybe we had started to hear about it, but it was just, something in China, something so far away, it didn't even seem something that we would ever experience firsthand, and then 2 months later, our whole world changed and our schools changed. And, as trustees, we were thinking about things that we never would have imagined. So it's been interesting.
So the initial run, was that in 2011 or 2010?
2010. And it was interesting because it was actually a special election. So the trustee that was in that position resigned abruptly. There was a year left of that seat, and the board could have either voted to appoint somebody or vote to call a special election, and they ended up calling a special election. And at that time, I couldn't have even told you who my trustee was. You know, we have single member districts. I mean, I couldn't even told you who anyone on the board was. And I had been a former teacher. I had taught for 10 years. I had taught in Houston Independent School District, but you know, I was just in my bubble of my classroom, and, you know, just shut my door and taught my kids and didn't think much more about it. And, you know, I had taken a hiatus from teaching. I was staying home with my kids, and my oldest had just started preschool, pre-K in Houston ISD. And so I started to pay a little more attention and realized that this was happening. Was contacted by someone that was looking, you know, to get folks to run that would never have considered it otherwise. And, you know, started talking to other folks, and I thought, yeah, like, this sounds great. I really, you know, I want to help kids. I've been a teacher. Like, I understand there's a lot of inequities. I see it firsthand. You know, my oldest kid, we live in the middle of Houston. We were attending our Title I neighborhood school. I could see the disparities that existed. And I thought, yeah, if I can influence change, why not? Had no idea what a campaign was, what, you know, actually being a trustee entailed. And so just kind of dove headfirst and blind. It's probably, you know, I probably wouldn't have said yes had I understood all of the complexities. But, you know, it was a huge learning experience. I don't regret it by any means. Met a lot of amazing people, with, you know, able to talk to so many voters and parents across the district, and hear, you know, their concerns, and understand much better, you know, the picture of what HISD is. Mm-hmm. So there were 6 of us on the ballot because there was no incumbent, right? So the 2 top candidates, we went into a runoff. So I had 34% of the vote. The next candidate had 20%. So I had a huge lead. And then it was the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. We were the only thing on the ballot. There was nothing else in Harris County. I remember it was like 6 p.m. The polls were going to close at 7, and I was knocking on doors and, please go to the polls. And it was cold. You know, people weren't thinking about voting. You know, it had already passed. It was almost Christmas time. And I ended up losing by 44 votes. 44 votes. That's it.
Oh,
it was such a close election, you know? And so I thought, and I remember just coming out of it, you know, and reflecting and just thinking, wow, you know, that was rough. It wasn't just rough on me. It was rough on my family. My kids were 5, 3, and my youngest turned 1 during the election, during the campaign. So, you know, it was a sacrifice for all of us, but it was a huge, you know, learning experience. And so a year later was the regular election, the 4-year election for that seat. And so folks were like, you're going to run again, right? I'm still getting over that campaign. You know, like, I can't even think about running again. And, you know, just having had that sacrifice for my family, I thought, I can't put them through that again. So then 4 years later, the next cycle comes up again, and I'm like, no, my kids are too young. It's just, I just can't, it's not right. And so I started to try to find people to run. You know, it's like, we need to get, you know, some high quality candidates. I talked to so many community leaders, parents, and people would see, you know, how much time it was taking. It's unpaid, and thinking, I can't do this. There's just no way. Then I saw that no one wanted to run. The incumbent hadn't made clear if she was going to run again or not. And the Houston ISD board was, or still is, in the middle of a lawsuit with the Texas Education Agency. They were being investigated during my campaign time. And so I realized, like, we need new leadership. And, you know, I'm a person, I seek God in all the decisions I make. And somehow I knew I was just going to do it again. And I thought, no, I can't, this is no. And then I filed, and all of the memories of what a campaign is started coming back. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm on this fast-paced train. Here we go. You know, I'm on it. I can't look back. And it was amazing. And the cool thing about running the second time, and I'm curious if this was your experience, like you meet all the people that when you ran the first time, and then in the last, 9 years, period during that time, my kids went through the system. I met many more parents, was founded a PTO, just my network increased, and particularly among parents in the district. And so I had, an army of volunteers the second time around, folks that were just galvanized and wanting change. So it was a very different experience the second time. Was it any easier? No. I mean, the campaign is just, you know how hard it is. You've got to hit the pavement. You've got to knock on doors. So I started block walking in July, and many people told me that's too early. People aren't going to remember. So out of the 9 districts, I have one of the largest. I think our target universe was about 14,000 voters. I personally knocked on 3,500 doors. I block walked every evening as long as it wasn't raining, every Saturday, every Sunday, had volunteers and paid staff doing the same thing. So, it's hard work to run a campaign. And sometimes I think I wish it were easier. I wish that it didn't require, I don't want to say so much effort, but, I ended up resigning I worked at a very small nonprofit. And I remember my boss, and I told him, I was like, I filed to run. And he told me, do what you need to do. We'll be flexible with you. But, a couple months went by, and I realized I can't, we wear so many hats at that small nonprofit. I was like, I can't do it all. And I didn't feel like it was fair to my colleagues to put everything on them. And so ended up resigning so that I could focus full time on the campaign. And there's plenty of folks that work full time and run a campaign, but it's really, really hard. It's very hard, I think, to balance all things. And then, I'm a mom on top of all of those other hats I wear. And even now that I'm a trustee, in Texas, trustees aren't paid, no stipend, nothing. And it should be, something that you're spending, maybe 5 hours a week, ends up being so much more. And so it's difficult, I think, to balance. And I wish that there were an easier way for folks that would want to do this to be able to do it. That, if they don't have to quit their job to be able to do it, I wish that we could make it easier.
I wish that was the case also. And there's some mechanics that are associated with actually putting together an operation. I remember when I initially started running, somebody set me down, and he told me, initially, like there's a distinction between thinking about it and I'm doing it, right? And getting over that hump is kind of the first step. And then, because once you are committed to doing it, at least for me in my journey going down the path, there's a lot of things that are really uncomfortable about running that you just have to get over or like not do well at, right? Like raising money. Was fundraising a part of your first campaign, second campaign?
So interestingly, the first time I ran, and that was part of the reason that I decided to do it, because, my network was teachers. That was all the people I knew in Houston, not people with money. And, an individual and some folks that worked with her were willing to help with that fundraising aspect. So that helped tremendously. The second time around, so it's interesting, in the last, I want to say maybe 5 years in Houston, there's been a lot more intentional thought, and I think organizations that are supporting candidates and not just endorsing them, but endorsing them monetarily, and particularly school board candidates, right? Because you've always got, you've got the Harris County Democrats or Republicans or, whatever they've always endorsed, or there's other organizations that have PACs that have existed for a long time. And there's a lot more new PACs that are supporting. And so that was also, that helped me make my decision, knowing that potential money from organizations existed, let alone, the network that I had amassed, the last decade that would help me. It's still a challenge. It's probably like the least favorite part for me of campaigning, having to call people and ask for money. But, that motivation, knowing what it's for, it helps for sure.
A lot about a campaign is dealing with rejection, right? So you ask for money, people say no. You ask for their vote, people say no. Some people say yes.
Yeah.
But you got to get through the no's. Would you say that something in your past like prepared you to get through the no's, or was it just something that like was really uncomfortable, you just kept walking through?
I'm, as a person, my personality, and I think folks that know me really well, I don't normally take things personally. Like, things just roll off my back. I don't get offended easily. I don't hold grudges. So when folks, when I experience rejection, either at somebody's door or, not getting an endorsement that I thought I was going to get, or, even people getting dirty and saying mean things in the campaign, I feel like I have that. It's just something that's how I've always been. I just don't take it personally, which I think helps a lot in a campaign, because there could be a lot of mudslinging, even people that you thought were on your side or that you trusted end up supporting the other person. And that could be potentially very hurtful. And what happens when you let that get to you, that it distracts you from what you should be doing, right? Then you can easily get down and then, well, gosh, I don't want to fundraise now. Why bother even going knocking on doors? What's the point, right? I'm a pretty driven person. When there's an end goal, it's like nothing else, it's just everything bounces off. I'm like, okay, I've just got to get to that end goal. And then at the end, when the campaign's over, I start to reflect on some of the things that happened or were said. And I thought, oh, okay, that probably wasn't very positive. But it's like I can't even focus on it, because then I feel like it distracts me. But, if you're a person that's considering running, for any public office, it's something you have to kind of be prepared for, that people are going to be ugly, or some people are just going to say no. And you have to realize that you can't take it personally. You just have to move on.
In both of our journeys, you went through the initial process of getting acclimated to like, okay, I'm going to do this. And then you experience rejection along the way. At the end of it, I wouldn't say it's the ultimate rejection, but another form of rejection is the people saying, we want this other person more than you.
Yeah, exactly.
But you bounced back and you did it again. And the initial rejection of losing, the ultimate rejection, you might say. But then you realize when you start to serve that all of the stuff involved in winning has really nothing to do with governing. And you're governing at a time that is unprecedented for the country. Texas has been in the national news along with Florida for this sort of loosening restrictions early, which resulted like in a higher number of cases. So I want to get into that, but first, before we get into that, what is the approach that Houston is taking around how to start the first day of school?
So Houston ISD ended up deciding the first 6 weeks are going to be virtual, but they actually postponed the first day. So typically we would have started August 24th, the last Monday in August, but we postponed 2 weeks. So we're going to start the Tuesday after Labor Day. And the thought behind that, the administration decided this, I think, is so that, we're starting virtually. It'll take us into October, those 6 weeks. But if we start a little later, that gives, time to pass to hopefully, the curve starts to go down is the hope, right? And so if we see that the numbers start going down, then the administration is going to revisit this and decide whether we stay virtual for a couple more weeks or go back brick and mortar, or if there's a hybrid for parents to pick from.
Tell us a little bit about the Houston district, the amount of students.
Yeah, we have 208,000 students in the Houston Independent School District. There's 285 schools. Over 60% of the students are on free and reduced lunch. About 65% of the students are Latino. And so we have, high need, and Latino and the Black community in Houston has been, disproportionately affected by this virus, unfortunately. And so, and we know that the students that, are the most vulnerable are the ones that, when we're closed, when we have brick and mortar, when we have online learning, are not engaging as they would in a classroom. So out of our 207,000 students, 7,000 were not contacted during the spring semester. So, a lot of efforts were made to contact all students. There were even, social workers going and knocking on doors, safe distance, obviously, but there were 7,000 kids that were unaccounted for during this time. And so when you think about that number, that's a huge amount of students. And then even of the other students that were accounted for, that doesn't mean they were even necessarily logging on more than, a few times. And I don't think our experience is unique in Houston for what our students experienced during the spring semester with virtual learning. And I think, administration and teachers in our district have had time over the summer to think about, what they can do differently to engage more students. The challenges will still be there. There's a lot more intention with parent outreach this coming semester to help parents better support their own students at home, and teachers, I think just streamlining their learning a little bit more. It was, we all had to change overnight, parents, kids, teachers, principals, all of a sudden shift to this new way of learning. So it was a learning curve for everyone. But yeah, so Houston, it's a district with a lot of needs. We have a community schools model that has been, I want to say, about 3 years in our schools to really focus on the temporal needs of the students, and the families, to better support them so that students can focus and learn and get that social and emotional help that is so needed so that they're able to reach their full potential.
One of the things that I've been struggling with is this tension between, because you mentioned the amount of students that were unaccounted for, this tension between safety and compromising students' future. That kind of seems like those are on the table. Like, we either take the learning loss on the chin in the short term to save people's lives in the long term, or we try to, obviously as much as we can mitigate or ensure we don't have learning loss, and take all the precautions we can to save life long term. And the size of Houston is like 4 times the size of San Francisco. We have 56,000 students. You have over 200,000. But a lot of the similarities, when I was hearing you share the dynamics, it's similar. How do you fall on that tension that I'm sort of showcasing? Like, where are you with that?
I think about my own 3 kids, and I think, okay, do I feel comfortable and ready to send them to school? And then I think, well, then how do other parents feel? We look at the news, the numbers every day, and the cases haven't started going down. It seems like we're kind of, at a, same average. And I don't think there's enough research around, I think it was just Dr. Fauci said, particularly elementary age kids are not getting sick, right? It's safe. And I think if the safety precautions are really in place, and really in place for very young children, obviously teachers pose a risk, and that's why, we'd have to be very, very cautious. At the same time, those countries did not have the level of numbers that, Texas and particularly Houston are seeing right now. And so it worries me, because safety, like you're saying, the life of a person, that's what you have to think of more than anything else. That's That's first and foremost. But when I think about the learning loss that's happening, we know that summer slide, there's so much research around summer slide. Low-income students, high-need students, vulnerable students. These are our students that are always falling behind when they come back to school and having to make up, not just what they lost over the summer, but almost like going backwards back into the spring. So we take into account COVID slide. I don't even want to imagine where our students are going to be or how much learning loss has occurred. I don't think we have any idea of what that looks like yet. And so I think about the long-term effects of that. We weren't doing so well before COVID for our most vulnerable populations. Currently 39% of third graders in Houston are reading on grade level, 39%. And when you break that down by Black and Latino, you're going into the teens in terms of numbers. And so where does that leave our kids? And if I think about, they were already so far behind, and then this loss of learning is going to put, can they even catch up? Are they even going to be on track, not just in third grade, but, moving on in the rest of their lives? And so that's definitely what keeps me up at night. It does worry me. And I'm very curious to see, school districts that are opening brick and mortar, even if it's hybrid, obviously with much lower numbers. I really want to see how they do, because I want to get our kids back in school as quickly as possible so that that learning loss doesn't go on any longer than needed.
Right.
We have to be cautious, and we should be looking at data, and we need to be listening to scientists and experts more than politicians, but we need to, be analyzing that as much as possible.
Yeah, I was one of those people that when I heard, we all heard the news reports about Texas reopening. I wasn't one of the people. I honestly wasn't one of the people criticizing the state. That was like very easy to do. I was just kind of curious. I was curious, like, okay, like, what's going to happen? Because had it not gotten worse, I think that would have ignited more states reopening. Now,
oh yeah, for sure.
In the north, in the Midwest, in the smaller states also, places like New Hampshire and Montana and Maine, they aren't seeing the same rate of cases. They're starting to open up a bit more, but like Texas and Florida, like cases skyrocketed, right? And so I know that in Houston, Houston is a more progressive area than like Texas more broadly, right? Texas is a conservative state, and then there was this sort of like tension. There's always this beef between state and local if they're politically not aligned. Your district is kind of going through that, I think, a little bit around school. Can you explain a little bit about? You can sort of debunk does that tension exist locally and statewide?
Oh yeah.
Dynamic now. What's going on right now?
It's really, I guess the word interesting. I think it's challenging. It's very, very challenging. So, that tension definitely exists, both at the school district decision-making level, and then just even the county and mayor trying to make decisions about mask wearing, and the governor saying one thing and they're saying a different thing. So the Texas Education Agency is the entity in Texas that lays out the guidelines for opening, and that's all tied to funding, the state funding, right? And so I think early in July, they had said brick and mortar, or you don't get funding. So schools are scrambling and thinking, okay, what are we going to do? How can we do this safely? Thinking about PPE, social distancing, having to, how are you going to social distance when you're already overcrowded in your schools? Just so many different challenges. Well, then about a week later, they said, okay, you can actually do virtual, but only if all of the kids have devices and access to internet. So it's either a hotspot or Wi-Fi or whatever. Just yesterday, the Texas Attorney General said that local school districts did not have the authority or could not close if, like our county judge basically said schools can't open until after mid-September. And he said local school districts have to follow what the state says, not the county. So it's all this mixed messaging. But then today I've been reading about it, and they're saying that the Attorney General, it's not even legally binding what he's saying. That's just his opinion. That really ultimately the governor is the one that, and he's been pretty silent, the last few weeks. The governor is the one that can really say, yes, follow your local authorities, or no, this is what we're saying. And so many confusing messages. And we have, more than 20 school districts just in the Houston area alone. We're definitely the largest, and parents, before we came out with our public announcement, parents were beside themselves. Okay, what should I do? Should I be looking for homeschooling options, private school options? Like, what's going to happen? If you guys open, I'm not sending my kid. I don't feel safe when, have parents on both sides of the coin, in terms of decisions. And so it has been extremely, extremely challenging hearing those different messages and knowing that, potential funding could be cut because of, really looking out for the safety of students and staff. And so no easy decisions. And, I wonder how it is in other states if that tension doesn't exist. I would think it make it much more, it's challenging no matter what to try to come up with a reopening plan and safe or virtual learning. But it makes it much more challenging when, state leaders are saying contradicting statements within weeks of each other. Yes, no, oh, yes, oh, wait, no. And I know that things change daily, when we're looking at the coronavirus and the cases, but, as an entity, as a body, a decision-making body that influences hundreds of thousands of students across the state, those decisions need to be much more consistent to help support our school districts.
Yeah, it's a tough position to be in. I mean, it has been for me, and I guess it's not necessarily easy for anybody. And one of the things that has been my ongoing frustration is statements that are opinions, but people think it's policy, and then news reporters running with that like it's an announcement, and then people walking it back, or people using money as like a bargaining tactic when people's lives are on the line. It's really reckless. And I think no matter the party, there's been this like authoritarian approach that really bothers me personally. It's kind of like there's not a lot of shared decision making. There is urgency with this situation, but I think we're giving up I think we're giving over as state agencies, or as counties also, a lot of our decision making ability. And you see that not happening within certain pockets of society. Like the people that can afford to exclude themselves, they're going to do what they do because they can afford to do what they do. That's the POD movement, the pandemic POD movement, right? That's and then that's also a lot of people that aren't really engaged or in compliance with. They weren't in compliance with government before. Like you go to the Black community, not every Black community, but some, you'll see people having barbecues, kicking it, or any sort of like family focused community that's like, I'm not tripping on Corona, So that's like a common thing you see. And so trying to manage and lead in all of this is hard, right? But seeing it go down in Texas has been crazy. Y'all tripping.
Seriously. And then, it's interesting because we're independent school districts, right? That's what we're called in Texas. Uh-huh. So it's all about local control, supposedly, right? But it's like, I feel like we don't even get a say to decide what's best for Houston. Our numbers are different from, not the whole state, but a lot of the state. Smaller towns, smaller districts, they're not facing the same challenges as the large urban areas, or even the Rio Grande Valley is getting hit very, very hard by this pandemic. And so, I think local control is especially important at this time. And the folks closest to the people are the ones that know what's needed. And so it's been frustrating, to watch this definitely, and really be a part of it in Texas.
How do you think about your priorities right now?
I think I touched on it, the learning loss, just thinking about our most vulnerable students. When we talk about equity, whether we're online or brick and mortar, making sure that that's our priority. English language learners, special ed students, our students that were already identified as likely to repeat a grade or, just be behind. And so really making sure that we're intentional about reaching all of our students, but particularly those that have the highest need. And then how do you balance that with, the other spectrum of, like you mentioned, the pods, the parents that are like, well, shoot, we're just going to figure this out on our own because our school district, they don't feel like the school district's going to deliver. And so, meeting the needs of everyone during this time, but the ones I worry about the most are high needs students. Mm. So, those are definitely priorities.
Yeah, let me ask you, does Texas have a teachers union?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
There's actually a few different ones. The largest one, there's a state, and then there's a local chapter as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and they've been very vocal about, making sure that we're virtual. Initially, they were even talking about a strike, which is actually illegal. You can't strike. You can't strike in Texas, and so if you do, you risk losing not just your contract but your retirement, which is part of the state. So, I think when they're thinking about doing something that drastic, they feel pretty strongly about it. So there were conversations at both the state level union and also the local union.
Well, I don't have you too much longer, and I kind of want to touch base. I want to ask a few personal questions before we close this thing out. There's way more issues to cover than we had time to. I appreciate hearing more about your story and what you're contending with in the great city of Houston, one of my favorite places in the world. I have a list of rapid fire questions. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Trustee Cruz is always ready.
I try to be.
Okay. Do you meditate?
Not as much as I should, honestly. And with this pandemic, I found myself, really feeling that need to do it more. Really need to focus my thoughts. I mean, my mind's everywhere with what could happen. So, yes, but very limited amount.
What personal weakness can you forgive in someone?
I'm a pretty forgiving person. I probably forgive more easily than I should, I think. I think, I tend to look at people and I try to put myself in their position. And I tend to forgive people when I realize their intention isn't how it's being perceived or what's actually happening, right? So I tend to forgive someone if I realize that their intention is what they think in their head, and I try to communicate, through that situation. But I think that's the first thing that comes to mind. It's just realizing a lot of times, what someone's doing and saying, I or other people perceive in a completely different way. And so just trying to step back or understand what their intention is.
What was your worst moment in your career?
I would say losing the first election. It's a hard, and probably just the campaign in general, a hard experience. Yeah.
44 votes.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's close. Would you rather lost by 4 votes?
Oof. Either number, it's so close. Anything that less than 100. There were I think less than 2,000 people turned out to vote in the runoff. It was really low voter turnout.
Who is your favorite child? I'm joking. Don't answer that.
Well, it's funny because they love to ask me that. And I'm like, they're all my favorite.
Which one of your colleagues do you hate the most? Don't answer that either. No.
I love them all. All
right. Last and final question. Who's going to win the presidential election?
I'm hoping for Biden. We definitely need a change. It's not the candidate I would have picked, initially of the Democratic candidates, but it's where we are. The polls are promising, and surprisingly in Texas, we had the highest voter turnout than we've had in a very long time, despite COVID. And I know that's what political analysts are thinking for the November turnout. And there's a huge movement to turn Texas blue. We're purple, we're getting there. So it'll be exciting to see what happens.
This is another installment of Cook on Quarantine. I was able to talk to the lovely Miss Judith Cruz, trustee on the Houston Independent School District. Thank you again for your time.
Thanks, Simon. So nice to be here.
Peace. And thank you for listening to another episode of Cook on Monday Morning. At Cook on Monday Morning, we're building lives that make us excited about Monday morning. We believe that if we can own Monday morning, we can own the week. If we can own the week, we can own the year. And if we change our year, we can change our lives. I'd like to thank Trustee Judith Cruz for sharing her story and the lessons she's learned running for office in Houston. We need more women like her in public service. So I hope this episode will inspire anyone looking to do more to change their community and get involved. I'd like to thank you, our listeners, and those that continue to subscribe to the podcast on the Cook on Monday Morning YouTube channel. I am deeply grateful for your support. Thank you. Please share the podcast with a friend. Help us grow this community of doers. Take a minute to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also rate and review it on Apple. If you're interested in starting a podcast, I wrote an article. It's called How to Start a Podcast During the Pandemic. It goes over the equipment I use and has book recommendations. You can read the full article. It's in the description box below. Cook on Monday Morning is a product of the Luther Harris Holding Company. We work in partnership to create solutions that drive social impact. We do that by building strategic partnerships between businesses and government, recruit diversity talent to high impact roles, and we help companies drive impact in the communities where they do business. If you'd like to learn more, send me an email, info@stevoncook.com. Again, I'd like to thank our listeners and the people that made this podcast possible. Our videographer, David Topete. Thank you. Our copy editors, Fernando Cinco Marquez and Devin Sketchinger. I get up every morning with the intention to create value and showcase love to the people that keep our cities moving. They are our teachers, school lunch workers, custodians, social workers, firefighters, police officers, EMT workers, garbage collectors, bus drivers, and nurses. They are our employers, the folks creating jobs and keeping our economy moving. They are our gig workers, stocking our shelves, driving our ride shares, delivering our food to all of you. This podcast is for you. You live in places like San Francisco, Oakland, Richmond, Antioch, San Mateo, Los Angeles, Dallas, Houston, New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Miami, Orlando, the Carolinas, Virginia Beach, Milwaukee, Kansas City, Cleveland, Detroit, Harlem, Brooklyn. And also, I want to give a shout out to our listeners in Nigeria, Ghana, Jamaica, Kenya, and Ethiopia. This podcast is for you. It's for all of you. This message is touching the world. It will continue to because of you. Until we meet again. Peace, and we out.